Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Center for Academic Shi'a Studies. My name is Al-Khoei. I am an Associate Fellow at Chatham House, and I'll be chairing this evening's seminar with Aymenn Jawad Al-Tamimi on the nature of the split between the Islamic State of Iraq and ash-Sham and Al-Qaeda, and how this impacts the insurgencies in both Syria and Iraq. It's a pleasure to welcome Aymenn to London. He's actually based in Oxford, where he's finishing a degree in Classics and Oriental Studies at the University of Oxford. Aymenn has made a name for himself in recent years by meticulously tracking and monitoring jihadi groups in the Middle East, and especially the various armed groups that are currently fighting in Syria and Iraq. And his analysis is strengthened by the fact that he has personal contacts with many of the groups who are engaged in the fighting. Aymenn is a prolific writer and sought-after commentator who is regularly cited by international media such as the New York Times, Washington Post, Reuters, and the Financial Times. The format of this evening is going to be a 40-minute talk by Aymenn, followed by a 45-minute question and answer session. Before we start, can I just please ask you to put your phones on silent or switch them off?
Okay. Hello and welcome. Pleasure to be speaking this evening. So as Haider said, I'm going to be discussing the Islamic State of Iraq and ash-Sham, or ISIS for short, Al-Qaeda, the nature of the split between the two, and how this impacts the insurgent dynamics in Syria and Iraq. So the appropriate point to begin is the origins of ISIS. And for this, we have to go all the way back to 2006 because it's very important to trace out the narrative. There are actually competing narratives of the origin of ISIS from both supporters of ISIS and supporters of Al-Qaeda and how it developed. Now, the account I'm going to start with is the account that ISIS members and supporters themselves gives about their origins. So ISIS began as originated in the Islamic State of Iraq, or ISI. And this was formed in October 2006. It was after the death of Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. And this was an umbrella group that included Al-Qaeda in Iraq. But there's no doubt in my mind that, and this is the consensus of analysts, is that Al-Qaeda in Iraq was the main component of this umbrella group. However, the key issue here is that when ISI was formed, Al-Qaeda in Iraq's bay'ah, which is an Arabic term meaning the Pledge of Allegiance, it switched from Al-Qaeda Central to whoever is the leader of ISI. Now, at that time, it happened to be Abu Omar al-Baghdadi, and since 2010, the leader of ISI and subsequently ISIS, which is a successor group, has been a man called Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. And the consequence of this is that ISIS supporters and members claim that they have been independent, that ISI and its successor group have been independent from the very beginning from Al-Qaeda Central under bin Laden and subsequently under Aymenn al-Zawahiri. And it's an independent group from the beginning, and to justify this narrative, they say that in 2007 from 2007 onwards, on multiple occasions, people associated with Al-Qaeda Central gave their blessing to the Islamic State's independence from Al-Qaeda Central and the actual establishment of an Islamic State, hence the name. I mean, it's not merely a formality. They believe in them. ISIS and their members and supporters believe in themselves as a state, and I'll explain the importance of this a bit later on. But for example, they cite a video from featuring Aymenn al-Zawahiri in 2007, and he's asked to clarify in this video, is there still something called Al-Qaeda in Iraq? And Aymenn al-Zawahiri says, to quote him in Arabic, he says, أود أن أوضح أنه ليس في العراق شيئا باسم القاعدة ولكنها انضمت بفضل الله إلى جماعات الجهادية أخرى في الدولة الإسلامية في العراق. Which means, he said, I'd like to clarify there is nothing in Iraq now by the name of Al-Qaeda, but it joined, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, that is, it joined by God's preference, the other jihadi groups in forming this umbrella group the Islamic State of Iraq. He doesn't explicitly mention the dissolving of the bay'ah, of the Pledge of Allegiance from Al-Qaeda in Iraq, being switched from Al-Qaeda Central to whoever leads ISI, but ISIS members and supporters invoke this to say, look, we've been independent from the beginning. We haven't been part of Al-Qaeda since 2006 when Al-Qaeda in Iraq was supposed to have been dissolved. However, there is another competing narrative behind all this, and to understand this, we then have to look at the establishment of the group Jabhat al-Nusra li ash-Sham during the course of the Syrian civil war. Now, Jabhat al-Nusra li ash-Sham calls itself Tanzim al-Qaeda fi Bilad al-Sham. It is Al-Qaeda Central's official Syrian branch, and they've been emphasizing that more and more over time. Now, Jabhat al-Nusra's origins actually go back very, very early on in the Syrian conflict. They didn't actually publicly surface in any way till 2012, January, when there were the bombings in Damascus. But Jabhat al-Nusra, it was actually established secretly in Syria around mid-2011. And it was a contingent of jihadis under the leadership of a Syrian man called Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani. And what both sides agree on, both ISIS supporters and Al-Qaeda Central supporters and members, everyone agrees upon this, is that Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani, he came from Iraq, and secondly, that he took financial support and manpower from ISI, the Islamic State of Iraq. But there is the fundamental disagreement then comes on the nature of this. When Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi in April 2013 announced officially that Jabhat al-Nusra should be merged with ISI and become the Islamic State of Iraq and ash-Sham, or ISIS, Jawlani responded and said he had not been consulted on this, and in going back to the beginning of Jabhat al-Nusra, Jawlani portrays himself as autonomous, and he went to Iraq out of his own will because he couldn't ignore what was going on in his homeland, and this is why. But he at the same time admitted to taking support and both money and manpower from ISI. However, Baghdadi would disagree with this in saying that actually establishing Jabhat al-Nusra was my idea. You were acting under my orders, and I alone set up ISI. I alone set up Jabhat al-Nusra, or I was responsible for it, and therefore Jabhat al-Nusra is a mere imtidad of the extension of the Islamic State of Iraq, and therefore Jawlani, you should subsume to my authority, and your group should be merged with mine under my leadership to form the Islamic State of Iraq and ash-Sham. So when this actually publicly came to light in April 2013, there are some more issues regarding this dispute allegedly going earlier back that I'll discuss. But after the dispute became public in April 2013, there was a silence or so for about a month and a half, 2 months. And there's a confusion on the ground as to are we ISIS or are we Jabhat al-Nusra and so on. And then in June, Aymenn Jawad, the leader of Al-Qaeda Central, a letter he wrote was leaked to Al Jazeera in which he stated that the ISIS should be dissolved. Now, the key to Zawahiri's involvement in this is the fact that Jawlani, in his speech announcing that he'd not been consulted on merging with ISI, he then concluded his statement by saying he was renewing his pledge of allegiance to Aymenn al-Zawahiri. Now, this is another key point of controversy because ISIS supporters and members will tell you that Jawlani never had a pledge of allegiance to Aymenn al-Zawahiri by virtue of his being a member, or by the fact that Jawlani was a member of ISI And to go back to the earlier point I stated about the ISIS narrative about always having been independent of Al-Qaeda Central, therefore, the argument is that Jolani just lied about having a pledge of allegiance to Aymenn al-Zawahiri in the first place, and he only did that, he only renewed it because he wanted to involve Aymenn in the dispute and to get him to rule favorably in maintaining Jabhat al-Nusra as an independent group from ISI. So as I said, Zawahiri, as Jolani anticipated, he did rule in favor ruled in favor of Jolani, and he called for ISIS to be dissolved, and it should just be ISI and Jabhat al-Nusra separate groupings, but they should work together at the same time. However, the Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, he rejected that ruling from Aymenn al-Zawahiri, and he released an audio entitled Baqiyah, which means remaining or steadfast, and this has become a key ISIS slogan, in which he insisted that he disputed the methodology and legality of Aymenn al-Zawahiri's call to dissolve the Islamic State of Iraq and ash-Sham. And he insisted that it would remain the Islamic State would remain Baqiyah in both Iraq and Syria and ash-Sham, or the Greater Levant. And so he rejected Zawahiri's ruling. That's another key turning point in June 2013. However, he was courteous. He didn't do it it wasn't exactly hostile, tried not to show any hostility to Aymenn al-Zawahiri. But ISIS then appointed a new official spokesperson called Abu Muhammad al-Adnani, and he is a Syrian man from Idlib province in western Syria. But he, like Jolani, is a veteran of the fighting in Iraq. And he became ISIS's official spokesperson. He was a lot more forceful and confrontational than Baghdadi. And going back to the key talking point I said about the ISIS claim that Jolani never had an allegiance to the to Al-Qaeda Central. In so doing, Adnani accused Jolani of inshiqaq, or defection from the Islamic State, and that Zawahiri was essentially enforcing Sykes-Picot borders between Syria and Iraq, and that the Islamic State would never accept this. So this affirmation of rejection, what ISIS did was it continued to expand its power base in Syria. To illustrate just how complex this dispute is, many Syrian fighters on the ground in Syria who were part of Jabhat al-Nusra accepted Baghdadi's argument that Jabhat al-Nusra was set up by ISI, and that it should subsume to his authority, and they therefore declared for ISIS. And there were a number of key areas in which they did so, in which Jabhat al-Nusra fighters declared for ISIS. And moreover, the majority of foreign fighters in Syria have declared for ISIS over Jabhat al-Nusra. We're going to discuss a bit later on the international trends, who supports which side in this dispute. But most of the foreign fighters on the ground in Syria have subsequently, both those who were already on the ground, those who've subsequently come, have become members of ISIS, and they accept Baghdadi's argument. So, for example, some key places which have come up in news media you may have heard of, for example, Raqqa city along the Euphrates in northern Syria, members declared for ISIS. In a lot of Aleppo areas, Jabhat al-Nusra members declared for ISIS. Some were a bit more interesting. For example, there's a town on the border on the Euphrates bordering Iraq in the eastern Deir ez-Zor province called Abu Kamal. And the local Jabhat al-Nusra branch declared for ISIS after Baghdadi announced the establishment of ISIS, but then switched back to Jabhat al-Nusra once Zawahiri's letter came out. And a lot of people in Deir ez-Zor province in the east bordering Iraq actually did redeclare for Jabhat al-Nusra. However, ISIS is a reality on the ground. No one was going to dislodge it, and for the sake of brotherhood, so to speak, in terms of the fact that Jabhat al-Nusra and ISIS ultimately have the same end goal, which is the establishment of a caliphate. I have to say menhaj, which is a program. This is a term used in jihadi discourse for what kind of ideological vision they have. They did work in many places on the ground together. So, for example, they launched many joint offensives on Kurdish-held territory in Aleppo province, in Raqqa province, and in Hasaka province across. And in this, they were joined by other rebel groups like ash-Sham, which is a Salafi grouping, Liwa Tawheed, which is a Ikhwani Islamist grouping, but they're now part of the same coalition. And at the same time, they were working together in there's this goal of emphasis of fighting the regime, and again, cooperation on many fronts. For example, the best example actually, which involved ISIS working with non-jihadi groupings, comes in August, when ISIS worked with the Aleppo FSA military council under Colonel Al-Qaeda and with several other groupings in bringing about the downfall of Manag Air Base in northern Aleppo. And at the time, Colonel Al-Qaeda was asked by a rebel outlet called Orient News, what is your view on ISIS? You know, a lot of people have concerns about their conduct and their expansion. And this is a time when ISIS has already seized a number of towns from rival rebel groups, like a northern border stronghold called Jarablus in Aleppo province. They took over the town completely in June and kicked out and subjugated the local FSA grouping called the Family of Jaddah. But anyway, Colonel Al-Qaeda of the Aleppo FSA military council dismissed the concerns of others and said that actually our relations with ISIS are excellent and that they're just being subject to media smears and from Al Arabiya and the Saudis and so on. So initially, not much. There were concerns about ISIS's expansion and how they were seemingly invoking pretexts to subjugate rival groups in different localities. But on the whole, there was still much cooperation, and I think a lot of rebel groupings, particularly Jabhat al-Nusra and particularly the more Islamist-leaning ones, and particularly in the Salafis like ash-Sham, they saw ISIS as a force to work with. Some of them on ideological grounds, others seeing them as an effective military force. And the first real tensions in terms of on the ground between Jabhat al-Nusra and ISIS, in terms of actually fighting, first emerged in September of 2013. There was a locality, the most notable instance was the fact that someone who had been an emir for ISIS in Raqqa, called Abu Sa'd al-Hadrami, decided to defect from ISIS, and he went to a nearby city called Tabqa, which is also in Raqqa province. But then he decided to re-establish the name of Jabhat al-Nusra in Raqqa city in September, so he put out a statement saying this. And so Jabhat al-Nusra returned to the city, and there was immediately some light clashes in the city. But at the same time, Abu Sa'd al-Hadrami was kidnapped by ISIS. And then secondly, there was another locality east of that called ash-Shadadi, which was a Jabhat al-Nusra stronghold in Hasaka province, which got taken over by ISIS. Gradually then, fighting between ISIS and other groups, whether it was Islamic Front in ash-Sham and Liwa Tawheed and these groupings, or FSA banner groupings, it became a very serious problem in Aleppo province and Idlib province in particular. Then, as we know, by January 2014, widespread fighting between ISIS and other rebel groups had emerged, this began in Aleppo province and Idlib province, but sure enough, this didn't remain confined there, and it gradually spread to pretty much all areas where ISIS had a presence. Most notably in Raqqa city, very intense fighting arose between ISIS and ash-Sham, and ash-Sham being aligned with Jabhat al-Nusra. One appeal that Jabhat al-Nusra had was that in Raqqa city was that many of the FSA banner remnants, Free Syrian Army banner remnants, decided to pledge allegiance to Jabhat al-Nusra to protect themselves from ISIS. But however, that wasn't enough to protect themselves, because ISIS eventually expelled all their rivals from Raqqa city. In fact, they subjugated the entire province under their control, with the exception of a few regime bases in a Kurdish enclave just west of Tel Abyad, which is in northern Raqqa province bordering Turkey. This development was part of the wider trend that has emerged in the fighting between ISIS and other rebel groups, in that, like so many other conflicts that develop within the Syrian civil war, there's a stalemate trend where each side has consolidated its own positions. So what you have now is that ISIS, they're dominant in Raqqa province. They control most of eastern Aleppo province. They control also the rebel-held areas, the areas of Hasaka province, which borders Iraq, and in the northeast Syria. They control the areas that are not held by Kurdish or regime forces. They subjugated all their rivals or any other battalions. They take orders from ISIS. However, ISIS were largely expelled. ISIS largely left Idlib. They completely left Idlib province. They left Latakia province on the Mediterranean coastline. They left Hama province, and they were expelled from Deir ez-Zor province by Jabhat al-Nusra, working in collaboration with other rebel groupings. Now, with the onset of this, but the one exception that emerged was Damascus province, where ISIS found common cause with Jabhat al-Nusra and all the other rebel groups to continue trying to resist the regime's push in Qalamun, in Damascus, these mountain areas near the Lebanese border. And a spokesperson, a person I spoke to from, the spokesperson for Jabhat al-Nusra in Qalamun, whom I spoke with in January of this year, I asked him what was the rationale for this, and he said that Jabhat al-Nusra would protect ISIS in Damascus province because, despite difference in siyasa, or politics, the two groups ultimately have the same menhaj, which is the the ideological program of establishing a caliphate. And for this reason, the two would work together. And that trend has continued to this very day, that there's been no wider rebel ISIS infighting in Damascus province, but rather they see a need to stick together. And this has been so even after the fall of most of the Qalamun area to the regime, were backed by Hezbollah. On the more senior level, ISIS, then there were calls for mediation by independent Sharia committee or court, and a certain Saudi sheikh called Sheikh Mohassani, who's gone to Syria, and what he's worked to do is try to promote unity between jihadis. He launched something called the Ulnar Initiative in January, where he called for arbitration and for everyone to resolve their disputes and unite. Most rebel groupings declared support for this initiative, including Jabhat al-Nusra and including the other groupings completely detached from Jabhat al-Nusra ideologically, like the Syrian Revolutionaries Front. But ISIS rejected it because they said, we aren't going to go to arbitration with people who have a menhaj or a program that's against Islam, like the Syrian Revolutionaries Front, and so these reconciliation initiatives went nowhere, and the infighting by February, the infighting got so bad that Al-Qaeda Central decided to break silence and officially announce that there is no link between it and ISIS, and this is in February. But as I say, that doesn't mean that ISIS saw itself as an Al-Qaeda affiliate up to that very point, or ISIS saw itself as Al-Qaeda linked, which is another term they use in media. As I say, ISIS supporters and members always seen themselves as independent. Then this has led to the ongoing, there's now an ongoing propaganda war that Jabhat al-Nusra and ISIS are launching against each other, in English, in fact, to reach out to a wider Muslim audience about what's going on. And so, for example, Jabhat al-Nusra released a video by Abu Sulaiman al-Muhajir, He's an Australian-born man. I know him personally. We follow each other on Twitter. He's on Jabhat al-Nusra's highest Sharia committee, and he claims to have met Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi multiple times. He criticizes ISIS for not accepting status as a mere Jamaat, or group, and he says that actually Baghdadi did have a total pledge of allegiance to Zawahiri, and when internal disputes were ongoing about whether ISI and Jabhat al-Nusra should merge, he stressed that Baghdadi had a total pledge of allegiance to Zawahiri, and secondly that Baghdadi would agree to obey any ruling put out by Zawahiri. Now, of course, I have no way of independently verifying that, or anyone else, but ISIS is countered because they strongly object to being called, ISIS strongly object to being called a Jamaat, or a group. They insist that they are a state and that they have the authority of a state. And they've put out a series of videos called The Establishment of an Islamic State, where they're quoting al-Qaeda figures like Anwar al-Awlaki, the Yemeni American guy cleric who got killed in a drone strike, where he emphasizes that on October 2006, the Islamic State was established in Iraq, and again emphasizing the earlier years where al-Qaeda central members and supporters ostensibly gave their blessing for Islamic State of Iraq to be an independent state. But I can see myself at the time that they were never referring to ISI as a Jamaat. They seemed to accept ISIS's claim at the time that they had assumed the authority of an Islamic state. So this is why this dispute is so complicated, and it's really not a simple thing as just ISIS are crazy and they just did a completely a unilateral power grab that completely disregarded the facts. Actually, there's a very complex dispute going on here that's I think a lot more complicated than the media make it out to be. So what are the consequences of this ISIS expression of independence from Al-Qaeda Central? How do they differ from Jabhat al-Nusra? Well, one example, as I say, they have the same ideological program, which is the establishment of a caliphate. However, ISIS see themselves as the ones who are going to establish that caliphate. They don't, in the here and now, they are going to be the ones who lead this project. And hence, one of their slogans is Mashru' al-Khilafa al-Maw'ud, the promised project of the caliphate. And in Syria in particular, they openly state that. They've put up signboards with that slogan. For example, I've got a PowerPoint presentation here that will be put up on the website later. But there's a signboard they have from a stronghold they used to have in northwestern Aleppo province called Azaz. And they put up a signboard saying that with that slogan. Another one here from Aleppo province, they've another signboard they put up. They said, "Khilafa turdi al-Rab khair min hurriya turdi al-Gharb." The caliphate pleases the Lord better than freedom pleases the West. So, in other words, what they're doing is they are emphasizing that they are the ISIS is the proto-caliphate, and you can see that actually even before the Syrian civil war, because ISIS, whoever was leader of ISI would call himself Amir al-Mu'mineen, and Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi in particular, he's further supplementing his apparent legitimacy to being a caliph by calling himself al-Husseini, al-Qurayshi, claiming descent from the Ahl al-Bayt and from the Quraysh. And secondly, and linked to this point about establishing the caliphate is ISIS are much more open about their global ambitions. I say this doesn't mean that Jabhat al-Nusra and Al-Qaeda don't share this goal, but ISIS are very, very open that they believe that they should establish their caliphate over the entire world, and it's not only in Iraq and Syria or in the Greater Levant. And they've put out their supporters on social media. All the time they put out these graphics of the entire world under the ISIS banner, including one with Greenland under their banner as well. This is also on the PowerPoint presentation. You'll get to see it later. So now that I've outlined the ideology behind this, the nature of this dispute, I said that I would mention the foreign support trends. Who in the Muslim world backs which side? Now, as I said, on the ground in Syria, most Muhajirin accept Baghdadi's argument and they joined ISIS. Outside of this, there's the most notable foreign backers for ISIS in the Muslim world. There's Ansar al-Sharia, which is this jihadi grouping in Tunisia. And you can see that they support ISIS, and they've put out things on social media declaring Nusrat li-Dawlat al-Islamiyya, support for the Islamic State. And that's actually corroborated by the fact that ISIS have disproportionate number of Tunisian fighters in their foreign ranks. And definitely at least some of the Ansar al-Sharia in Libya support ISIS in this dispute. Some of them, at least some of them. And there is a separate, and ISIS have a separate Libyan division called Katiba al-Bitar al-Libi. Other areas, some in Somalia support ISIS, and there's a whole series of photos released by one of ISIS's media outlets showing Somalis declaring their support for ISIS. Some in Lebanon, especially around the Tripoli area. Yeah. The Gaza and Sinai, Jamaat Ansar Bayt al-Maqdis and Majlis Shura al-Mujahideen, which are two jihadi groupings in the Gaza and Sinai area, are also pro-ISIS, and they released official statements declaring their support for ISIS in the fight between ISIS and other rebel groups. But also, definitely, a lot of people in the Gulf and the Arabian and Saudi Arabia are pro-ISIS in this dispute. It's reflected, as say, in most Muhajirin on the ground joining ISIS, and ISIS also, there are these photos in social media that circulate of people in Saudi Arabia declaring their support for ISIS. On the Jabhat al-Nusra side, Jordan, I'd say, is the #1 country in the Muslim world that sees a pro-Jabhat al-Nusra trend. And they are and you can see leading Salafi clerics in Jordan who are pro-jihad in Syria. They write condemnations of ISIS's conduct. Corroboration on the ground comes because a lot of Jordanian fighters, they go through the southern border and they join up with Jabhat al-Nusra in the southern province of Deraa, where there's never been an ISIS presence in the first place. Harakat Sham al-Islam is this nominally independent group founded by Moroccan Muhajirin, by ex-Guantanamo detainees, Ibrahim bin Shakaroun, who recently was killed in fighting in Latakia. Nominally independent, but Syrian members of this grouping, there's a minority Syrian component to it, have declared that they are that they are closer to Jabhat al-Nusra and ISIS. They tried to resolve tensions between the two groups, but at heart they've always been closer, and Harakat Sham al-Islam is essentially an al-Qaeda-aligned project in Syria. Suqour is a Saudi-funded group, gets private support from the Gulf area. As their private support has drained over time, they've switched from being not officially independent to essentially working under Jabhat al-Nusra's wing. There's another group called Katiba al-Muhajirin in Syria, which is again based in Latakia. They officially declared they're merged with Jabhat al-Nusra. And then there's Jaysh al-Muhajirin wa al-Ansar, which is aligned with the Chechen jihadis in the Caucasus Emirate. Originally, it was aligned with ISIS as a front group, but then there was a split in November. So those who were pro-ISIS just became ISIS, and now those who want to retain Jaysh al-Muhajirin wa al-Ansar as a separate identity, they've become the Caucasus. They've remained a separate group, but they've worked closely with with Jabhat al-Nusra. And then there's finally Jamaat Ansar al-Islam, which is an Iraqi insurgent group that's fighting also in Syria. Work closely with Jabhat al-Nusra. They're very anti-ISIS, and so that's a summary of what's going on in Syria. It's an overall stalemate. ISIS is not going anywhere anytime soon. There are clandestine bombings and attacks that happen in each other's territory, with ISIS and rival rebels' territory. But one consequence for Jabhat al-Nusra has been they've become very popular among rebels in general. I've a Syrian Revolutionary Front commander, which was a group being touted by the West as a group that would fight the extremists in Syria. This commander, he told me that he thinks the Islamic Front, which is a Saudi-Qatari-backed Salafi coalition, are extremists and will be the next ISIS. But he said, Jabhat al-Nusra, they're not extremists. They're drawn from native Syrians, and they're our brothers. Now to go on to ISIS in Iraq. They are definitely the leading insurgent group. ISIS are definitely, no one in Iraq declared, no one in the Islamic State of Iraq and ash-Sham within the Iraqi territory took Al-Qaeda's side in this dispute. Just remained ISIS. It's been ISIS all along since Baghdadi announced it, and they've been using this name. There's been and so on. And they are the greatest. They are I'd say the most influential insurgent group in Iraq. They lead the fighting in parts of Ramadi. They are increasing their influence in Fallujah. They're the mafia in Mosul. They collect millions of dollars a month in extortion in Mosul and wider Nineveh province. They have a stronghold. They have a stronghold just south of Baghdad in Babel province and around Jurf al-Sakhr and al-Iskandariya in these areas. They operate with impunity around much of the Anbar Desert. And they've exploited sectarian tensions in Diyala province. Actually, they seized an area just south of Bakuba called Butres. For a day or two. They were driven out by the Iraqi security forces. I would say, why has ISIS grown in Iraq? I think there's some truth to the idea that Muhajirin are going across the border there's some truth to the idea that the Syrian civil war is having an effect on security in Iraq. In that I've seen a testimony from contacts I have within ISIS, within Syria, where they've spoken about, for example, Tunisian fighters going across the border from Syria into Iraq, and you see this open source material as well, because ISIS has been putting out Qawafilat Istishhadiyin, caravans of martyrs, and Tunisians feature unsurprisingly prominently among these ranks of Muhajirin killed fighting in Iraq for ISIS. I think security forces practices don't help. The government had some good ideas for reforms to try to, I think, integrate Sunnis and get better cooperation between Sunnis and security forces in April, with the reforms to de-Ba'athification that were put to the parliament by Mutlaq, Salih al-Mutlaq, with Maliki's approval. It broke down, was never passed in the parliament. And then there were those prison breaks by ISIS in July in Abu Ghraib and Taji, and it's really helped bolster ISIS's standing. And definitely they use their extensive financial resources to build their popularity among locals. They've done this in Fallujah, for example, since they entered the city in January. They've advertised themselves distributing food and so on to locals, helping to open a primary school. And their main just to finish off, who are their major competitors in Iraq, or who are the other insurgent groups, and what are the relations? So there's Jamaat Ansar al-Islam, same ideology as ISIS, essentially, establishment of a caliphate, anti-Shia, and so on. But they're at odds with ISIS. They've clashed multiple times. Jamaat Ansar al-Islam mainly in Mosul and Kirkuk. They've reappeared in Fallujah, but they're a minor presence. There's the Naqshbandi army, which are a Bathi, Sufi, and Izzat Ibrahim ad-Duri. These Majlis al-Askari, the Fawara, the Sha'ir, these tribal military councils that you've seen springing up over the country, a lot of them can be identified as Naqshbandi front groups. Ultimately, they are going to be at odds of ISIS because they don't share the same ideology. Then there's the Islamic Army of Iraq, which is a Salafi grouping, but their ultimate goal, they're not revolutionaries like the Naqshbandi army. They want to their Islamic Army of Iraq's goal is just to establish a Sunni region. They're also at odds of ISIS. There's Jaysh al-Mujahideen, who are an older insurgent group. They are against the Islamic Army of Iraq because the Islamic Army of Iraq actually had a political wing called the Sunni Popular Movement, which joined the protests in 2013. Then there's the last major one I'll mention is Jabhat al-Murabitin, which is a recently announced thing, which is rumored to be a reincarnation of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. I don't really think I buy that, but they are also against ISIS. However, the point I want to emphasize is that firstly, all these groupings, they don't have the strength to confront ISIS. They don't compare with ISIS in terms of financial resources and the number of operations that they carry out. For example, to give a statistical comparison, take Nineveh province in northern Iraq. ISIS, you could count hundreds of operations each month. Maybe Jamaat and Ansar Islam get several dozen, but the two don't compare. So they don't have the strength to take on ISIS, and then secondly, they see a common enemy in the government in Baghdad. So the moment in Iraq, ISIS really are on the ascendance, and they have newfound popularity in areas like Fallujah, where they've been openly holding parades. They're superior to the other groups in numbers of operations they carry out and the financing. However, as I say, the dynamics, how these groups each feel about each other, it is not a complicated. It is a complex story. But for now, I don't see wider infighting between other insurgent groups and ISIS in the manner that is currently taking place in Syria.
Thank you very much, Aymenn. I think that's